A Tale of a Muslim Girl and Her Infidel Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Before we dive into the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader that this novel is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. The Muslim Apostate Girl and Her Apostate Infidel Lover. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the real life of a Muslim girl in Sudan. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 20. The creation of the modern terrorist groups in the Muslim world. All the protests and pleadings of the international organizations and other Western countries could not succeed in changing the decision of the Supreme Court in Ankara. The United Nations organization threatened to place political and economic sanctions on Turkey. The government of the United States of America threatened to add the name of Turkey to the list of the 7 countries which are the sources of terrorism, and ban all Turkish citizens from entering its soil. Despite all the international protests and threats, nothing has worked. When all doors are closed and the unjustly condemned Sudanese refugee girl Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin accepted her fate and began to live in Ankara in the most maximum security penitentiary, there is suddenly a ray of hope has shone in the least expected place in the world. A full recorded speech of the controversial speaker, who had been tried and condemned to 200 years prison term on that fateful night, was uploaded on YouTube. The FBI agents have traced it to a computer in the USA. The computer is in a public library in New York. Even so, the FBI could not find the person who uploaded that speech. Many questions remained unanswered as to who recorded the speech, how he or she recorded it, who uploaded it, and how it ended up in the United States of America. The FBI speech experts identified the voice of Dr. Ibtihal and verified the authenticity of her speech. The recording was done in such an excellent manner that the voices of some Christian members of the Church of Prosperity, who raised some questions, were also verified. The recording included the raid of the Ankara police and what took place during the arrest. 2 weeks have already passed since the Turkish Supreme Court sentenced the Sudanese author Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin to 200 years imprisonment. During her entire speech, she did neither say the Prophet Muhammad is the devil incarnated in human form nor equated him with Satan. Her speech showed exactly accurate quotations to many Quranic verses and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, and those quotations were compared with stories and verses of the Lord Jesus Christ in the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only controversial words that she spoke were those when she said that the Prophet Muhammad is the man of war and Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace. In that, she could not be held guilty because Muslim historians and scholars throughout the history of Islam admitted that their Prophet Muhammad declared jihad against non-Muslims, who are called in the Quran the unclean infidels, see Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 28. Moreover, he fought many wars in his lifetime. Even Muhammad himself said, "I have been sent with the sword between my hands so that no one should be worshipped except Allah. I have been made victorious through terror. I have been commanded to fight people until they bear witness there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The recorded speech of the controversial author Ibtihal in the Leela Palace Hotel has been downloaded to computers and cell phones by millions of people all over the world. As a consequence of the great discovery of the unavoidable evidence, the Ankara Supreme Court has been compelled to nullify the sentence of the chief judge and acquitted the innocent Sudanese woman Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin as soon as the speech became public and millions of people heard it. Exactly 20 days have passed since the so-called cursed Muslim apostate woman had been sentenced to 200 years imprisonment. In accordance, the imprisoned Sudanese apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal has been declared a free woman and granted permission to leave the country. Under pressure from the CIA and some human rights activists in Turkey, the Ankara government placed restrictions on the whereabouts of the released resettled refugee Sudanese girl Ibtihal Taha al-Amin, and forbade any media people to approach her. The top American agents of the CIA organized her secret trip out of the country by private plane. No one knew that the freed Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal left the country except her pilot and some top members of the CIA. The Muslim people in Turkey have become extremely outraged when they came to know after 24 hours that the blasphemous woman Ibtihal had safely left their country. No one knows where she went. The media people made many speculations about her new destination. Even so, no one could make correct guessing. Notwithstanding, it is shocking and breaking news for everyone in the world when the CNN News announced that the freed Sudanese woman Ibtihal is now staying temporarily in the capital city of the most dangerous Muslim country in the world. CNN showed a full-hour coverage of her while she is speaking to the U.S. Marines in Baghdad City. In her speech, she talked about the modern terrorist groups in the Muslim world. She traced the origins of those groups to the Organization of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna. The genius Sudanese speaker Ibtihal explained to the American Marines how the Muslim Brotherhood had been broken up into 3 terrorist groups after its second leader Sayyid Qutb wrote his famous work Malam fi al-Tariq, which means milestones in the road of jihad. This book became the manifesto of all Islamic terrorist groups ever since. He borrowed the concept of declaring today's Muslim society as a pre-Islamic society of the Jahiliyyah from the teachings of the contemporary Pakistani Muslim thinker Syed Abul Ala Maududi. Although Sayyid Qutb was arrested, tried, and hanged by the former Egyptian President Jamal Abdul Nasser in 1966, his book remained the guidelines to the main 3 Islamist groups that split from the Muslim Brotherhood, namely 1. The Society of Muslims, 2. The Jamaat Islamiyya, and 3. The Jihad Group. Those 3 terrorist groups like a deadly plague or coronavirus spread all over the Middle East and North Africa, and soon every Muslim country had branches of them. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the second man of al-Qaeda, was an active member of the Jihad Group in Egypt before he left it and joined Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. Some have argued that without the writings of the Islamic author and thinker Sayyid Qutb, the 2 infamous terrorist groups al-Qaeda and ISIS would not have existed. Some critics said that al-Banna was the spiritual founder, and Qutb was the intellectual thinker of all the modern Muslim terrorist groups. Sayyid Qutb stated that because of the lack of Sharia law today anywhere, the Muslim world is no longer Muslim, having reverted to the pre-Islamic period known as Jahiliyyah. To restore Islam, a vanguard movement of righteous Muslims is needed to implement Sharia and rid the Muslim world of any non-Muslim influences caused by the secular Western countries. Qutb had an even greater influence on Osama bin Laden's mentor and another leading member of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri's uncle and maternal family patriarch, Mahfouz Azam, was Qutb's student, then a personal executor of his estate, one of the last people to see Qutb before his execution. Young Ayman al-Zawahiri heard again and again from his beloved uncle Mahfouz Azam about the purity of Qutb's character and the torment he had endured in prison. Zawahiri paid homage to Qutb in his work nights under the Prophet's banner. Shortly after Zawahiri joined it, in April 2002, Osama bin Laden's group in Afghanistan adopted the name Qaeda al-Jihad, which means the base of jihad. According to Dia Rashwan, this is, apparently as a result of the merger of the overseas branch of Egypt's al-Jihad group, led by Ayman al-Zawahiri, with the groups Osama bin Laden brought under his control after he fled from Sudan and returned to Afghanistan in the mid-1990s. Al-Qaeda succeeded in creating Islamic terrorist groups in countries such as Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Somalia, Nigeria, and Sudan in Africa, Bosnia and Herzegovina in Europe, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Philippines and Indonesia in Asia, and Iraq, Israel, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon in the Middle East. Those groups share the same objectives as Afghanistan's Al-Qaeda: 1. Restoring the missing imperative Islamic obligation of the jihad, or holy war against the infidels; 2. Ridding Muslim countries of the Western secular influences; 3. Restoring the Sharia; 4. Creating the Islamic Caliphate; and 5. All Muslim countries must be ruled by one supreme caliph of the Prophet Muhammad. Accordingly, Al-Qaeda's objectives include the end of foreign influence in Muslim countries, and the creation of a new Islamic Caliphate that should unite all Muslim countries under one leader traditionally known as the Caliph. Later, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi would claim to be that Caliph and establish his Islamic Caliphate state in Syria and Iraq. The main leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, rejected al-Baghdadi's caliphate, and hence refused to recognize him as the Caliph of the Muslim countries. When he was in jail, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was a member of Al-Qaeda, and when he came out of the Iraqi dungeon declared himself the Caliph of the Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, ISIS has been considered by many critics to be an immature Harami baby, or an illegitimate child of Al-Qaeda and Taliban. Al-Qaeda and other Muslim terrorist groups believe that a Christian-Jewish alliance is conspiring to destroy Islam, and that the killing of Muslims, bystanders, and other non-Muslim civilians during suicidal missions of the Mujahideen is Islamically justified in jihad. Such claims are justified on the ground that the Sharia law does not allow non-Muslims to have equal rights as Muslims in the Muslim world. Chapter 21. The violent protests of Muslims in Iraq. The presence of the so-called accursed despicable Muslim apostate woman in Iraq has been considered by Muslims in the Middle East to be a challenge and insult to them. Many Islamic terrorist groups vowed that they would not allow the insulter of the Holy Prophet of God Muhammad to leave the Muslim world alive. They believe it is their Allah who brought the evil attacker of his true religion of Islam, an insulter of his beloved Prophet, because he wanted her to be slain by the lions of jihad. The Iranian government threatened to take drastic action against the government of Baghdad if the cursed Sudanese woman, who authored a provocative anti-Islamic book against Islam, is not arrested and immediately condemned to death by the Iraqi criminal court. The American government did not take the threat of Iran seriously. But when the Iraqi government issued an arrest warrant against the refugee Sudanese woman Ibtihal Taha al-Amin, the matter became serious. The Iraqi criminal court decided to arrest and prosecute her on the charges of apostasy from Islam, derision of Islam, and insulting the Prophet Muhammad. The American troops found themselves facing a serious dilemma. The dilemma arose as soon as the Iranian government convinced the Muslim Shiites, who form the majority of the Iraqi citizens, to go into the streets and demand the execution of the Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal. On the other hand, the Iraqi government demanded that the American military generals should hand over Dr. Ibtihal to the police authority for her to be placed under trial for the many serious charges she had committed against Islam, such as apostasy, blasphemy, and insulting the Prophet Muhammad. The government also blamed the American troops for allowing such a hateful woman to speak in a Muslim country against Islam. That has been considered a challenge and insult to the religious sentiments of Muslims and their sacred beliefs. According to the president of Iraq, this irresponsible behavior of the American troops might cause serious conflict between the American Marines and the Muslim citizens. In the meantime, the Muslim terrorists used powerful bombs and blew up many places in Baghdad, thinking that the apostate woman Ibtihal might be hidden in one of them. The Iraqi citizens threw stones at some American military bases. Some of the American Marines were forced to open fire on some protesters to keep them away from their barracks. The city of Baghdad has turned into riots and chaos. To control the angry protesters, the American troops announced that Dr. Ibtihal would be sent out of the country of Iraq within 24 hours. Such an announcement has angered the Iraqi government and is considered a serious challenge to its sovereignty. Moreover, the outraged protesters intensified their protests when they heard that the cursed blasphemous woman would be sent out of Iraq without being punished for insulting the Prophet Muhammad. the protesters moved to the Baghdad International Airport. They decided to intercept the military convoy that is going to escort the blasphemous Sudanese woman to the international airport and stone her to death. Therefore, the U.S. military generals canceled the trip of the controversial author Ibtihal to Europe when they learned that there are over 1 million angry Muslim protesters gathered in and around the international airport of the capital city of Iraq. The Iranian government threatened to invade militarily Iraq if the government of Baghdad failed to stop the American infidel generals from smuggling the accursed Sudanese woman out of the country. In other Muslim and Arab countries, there are similar riots and protests. Once again, the crowds in those countries burnt the caricatures of Dr. Ibtihal. The crowds demanded the immediate execution of the blasphemous woman. They said such a dangerous Muslim apostate woman shouldn't be allowed to live any longer. In other non-Arab Muslim countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Somalia, and Afghanistan, even the American flags had been set on fire. Meanwhile, the situation in Iraq and Iran is becoming worse and worse every minute and every hour. To appease the protesters and to keep the situation under control, the Iraqi government announced that there would be an emergency meeting held in a few hours to decide on the matter of the Sudanese apostate woman. A few hours later, some Iraqi government representatives met with some American military generals. Firstly, the Iraqi representatives tried to convince the American military generals that the Sudanese woman is guilty of crimes against Islam, and her crimes are punishable by Iraqi law. The generals rejected those charges on the grounds that whatever the suspected Sudanese woman Ibtihal Taha al-Amin had said or written she did out of Iraq, and therefore the law of the Iraqi Muslim people could not be applied against her. Secondly, the Iraqi representatives argued that Iraq has a legal treaty with Sudan, which requires that any Sudanese criminal who fled from Sudan and entered Iraq should be returned to his country, and vice versa. Although the military generals could not find sufficient excuses to reject such an argument, still they contended that those alleged crimes against Islam hadn't been committed by the fugitive Sudanese woman Ibtihal in Sudan but in some Western countries such as Greece, the USA, the UK, and Turkey. Then the Arab representatives tried to convince the so-called infidel Americans that the same woman had committed crimes in Sudan, such as escaping from jail, conspiring in the cruel murder of her father, and the hanging of the judge of the Sharia court in Khartoum. The generals said such alleged crimes through the legal representative of the Sudanese embassy were brought before the criminal court in Athens, but he couldn't prove it, and therefore Ibtihal was proven not guilty, and she was acquitted of those charges. Therefore, the meeting ended without either of the two parties being able to convince the other. However, the Iraqi government announced after the meeting that the Sudanese writer would be placed under arrest, and very soon, she would be prosecuted for her innumerable crimes such as apostasy and blasphemies. The second announcement of the Iraqi government appeased the angry Muslim protesters and helped the police to control the situation in the streets of Baghdad. While the negotiation is going on between the Iraqi government and the U.S. military generals concerning the fate of the Sudanese writer, Dr. Ibtihal left Baghdad in a military aircraft along with some wounded American Marines and headed towards Germany. Her secret trip had been kept hidden from the Iraqi government and the Arabic media. When the American military generals understood that the apostate Sudanese woman Ibtihal reached Germany safely, they informed the Iraqi government that the Sudanese writer had been wounded in one of the terrorist attacks on a foreign military base in Baghdad, and therefore she was transferred to Germany with some wounded American Marines for her medical treatment. The Iraqi government refused to believe the news and accused the military generals of conspiring with the Sudanese writer. At first, the Iraqi government thought that the Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal is still hidden somewhere in the country by the American generals. When the BBC World News announced that Ibtihal's plane had landed in Germany and showed her arrival, the members of the Iraqi government felt the American generals cheated them. Consequently, the Iraqi Muslim citizens destroyed half of their country when they came to know that their own government betrayed them and allowed the bitterest enemy of Allah, an insulter of their infallible prophet, Muhammad, to escape out of another Muslim country unharmed as she did before in Turkey. Chapter 23. Financial compensation for the sexually abused Muslim apostate girl. The controversial author who drafted the so-called provocative anti-Islamic book went through the most horrifying days and nights in her life during her brief stay in her cell inside the Turkish notorious prison. While she was in the women's prison in Ankara, the Turkish police interrogators had brutally abused her physically and sexually many times. She was continuously beaten and repeatedly raped by a group of Turkish policemen. She could not get a chance to talk to any media people in Turkey and expose the abuses and the tortures she was going through in jail. Dr. Ibtihal preferred not to speak about her bitter sexual abuse experience in the prison of Ankara while she was staying temporarily in Baghdad. As soon as she arrived in Germany, she conducted a press conference and spoke to the media about the brutal sexual and physical abuses she went through in the Ankara Central Prison. Many international organizations including the Human Rights, Women's Rights, and the United Nations demanded thorough investigations should be conducted to verify the claims of the former incarcerated Sudanese woman. The Ankara Police Authority denied the accusations of the Sudanese woman Ibtihal Taha al-Amin and considered them false claims meant to take revenge on them, and also aimed at defaming the judicial system in Turkey. For that reason, the police authority decided not to allow any foreign investigation to be carried out in the Ankara women's jail regarding this matter. The Turkish government supported the decision of the Ankara police, and hence refused to allow any international investigation groups to enter Turkey. In the meantime, Ibtihal's bodily and sexual abuses by the Ankara police have been medically confirmed by some highly qualified doctors in a German hospital. The medical report revealed that Ibtihal's body is full of fresh scars that resulted from the cruel beatings and repeated gang rapes. Dr. Ibtihal gave accurate descriptions of those who physically tortured her and sexually abused her. She mentioned that some Turkish policewomen took part in her beatings, and some of them made several attempts to murder her through torture. Some guards threatened her life and vowed not to allow her to survive in the Ankara prison for over a month. Dr. Ibtihal considered her survival after all those physical and sexual abuses a divine intervention and a mere miracle from God. The medical report left the Turkish government with no choice except to acquiesce to the demand of the international investigation groups. The government of Ankara knew and understood that, if the foreign investigation teams are forbidden to enter the country, Turkey would face drastic actions by many European countries and the government of the USA. It may even be removed from the NATO countries. Therefore, the investigation teams have been permitted to enter the country and verify the allegations of the Sudanese convict who was jailed for a while in solitary confinement in Ankara. The foreign investigation teams conducted thorough investigations into those allegations of physical and sexual abuse. Through forensic evidence and many eyewitnesses, the investigation teams working independently confirmed the claims of the terribly abused Sudanese woman. As a consequence of their findings, over 30 Turkish police officers and guards have been arrested after the investigations revealed that they were involved in committing physical and sexual abuses against the Sudanese prisoner. It was a big scandal when some Turkish policemen, policewomen, and guards had been arrested for committing such hideous crimes against an innocent foreign suspect. The foreign investigation teams demanded that the Turkish government should pay a compensation of $50 million to the viciously abused Sudanese woman. To clear such a nasty scandal, the Turkish government agreed to pay a compensation of $50 million to the victim, the controversial Sudanese author, Ibtihal Taha al-Amin. All Arab and Muslim countries protested against the decision of the Turkish government and considered it a cowardly and shameful compromise with the infidels and enemies of the exalted Allah and His holy Prophet Muhammad. Some presidents of those countries contacted the government of Turkey and requested them to stop paying such a huge amount of money to that Sudanese blasphemous woman, who might use it to propagate more anti-Islamic views in the world. Many Muslim scholars and preachers in Turkey and other Muslim countries spoke and preached against the Turkish government and the Iraqi government. They blamed the Muslim citizens of those countries and condemned them as cowards and unbelievers. Instead of punishing the cursed Muslim apostate and despicable woman Ibtihal, the Turkish government agreed to reward her for insulting the Prophet Muhammad. The preachers had been able to convince millions of their listeners that the infidel doctors of the German hospital fabricated the medical report of the physical and sexual abuses of the cursed Sudanese woman because they wanted to tarnish the good reputation of the Turkish police authority and spoil the beautiful name of Islam. Despite that, the Turkish government paid the compensation of $50 million to the resettled refugee Sudanese girl Ibtihal Taha al-Amin, and promised to prosecute those police male officers and guards of the women's prison of Ankara who had abused her physically and sexually. Chapter 24. The bodily, sexual, and psychological damages of the Muslim apostate girl are beyond remedy. Dr. Ibtihal got admitted to the hospital as soon as she informed the German police that she had been subjected to brutal beatings and cruel gang rapes in the Ankara jail. She was treated for various wounds in her body. The most serious damage happened to her private parts. Then she has undergone a couple of major surgeries on her genitals and 2 minor surgeries on other parts of her body. The doctors who had done her surgeries were astonished by the cruel way the Ankara police had brutally raped and beat her. Fortunately, all her operations were successful, and all her wounds were healed. She got discharged from the German health facility after she got hospitalized for a month and a half. Although the doctors were able to treat her physical wounds, it had been estimated that her psychological wounds might take a decade to be cured. Therefore, Dr. Ibtihal was assigned a psychiatrist as soon as she was discharged from the hospital. The women's rights organization in Germany had agreed to cover the expenses of the psychological treatment of the abused Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal. In the beginning, she was scheduled to meet her German psychiatrist on a daily basis for a couple of months. The psychiatrist had been able to penetrate into her wounded soul and went beyond Ankara's physical and psychological abuses to her bitter experiences as a born Muslim girl in Sudan. The psychoanalysis revealed that her father subjected her to physical abuse through beatings from childhood. Her mother also abused her by subjecting her at the age of 5 to the barbaric, inhumane, and harmful procedure of female genital mutilation. It also showed that her Muslim husband Tariq Omar al-Amin in Khartoum abused her physically and sexually. Her Arab husband among all her abusers caused the injuries in her body and the deepest hurt of her soul. The psychiatrist understood that it was the period in which Dr. Ibtihal was tied up and imprisoned inside her husband's house of obedience for 3 months that led to the starvation and untimely death of her first baby, which caused the deepest hurt in her heart. It was the Islamic Sharia court that passed the draconian law which is euphemistically called the obedience verdict or the house of obedience that gave her abusive Muslim husband the right to kidnap her through the police. Then he imprisoned, beat, starved, and raped her. That jungle-like law permitted the law enforcement officers of Khartoum to arrest and drag her like a criminal from her friend's residence, and brought her to her husband's house, and forced her to live with him against her will. In that haunted ghost house, she was brutally raped and cruelly battered day and night by her Muslim husband Tariq. After hearing the incredible narration, and the details of such brutal abuses, the German psychiatrist concluded that no matter how long her patient might be subjected to therapy or psychological counseling, those injuries of her body and hurt of her soul would never be completely healed. For a long time, the Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal was carrying inside her subconsciousness a feeling of resentment against her ex-husband and holding him responsible for the murder of her first baby. Unless the law in Sudan would bring her ex-husband to justice and convict him of the murder of an innocent infant, it would be impossible for the terribly abused woman Ibtihal to be relieved from that deep hurt. Accordingly, the psychiatrist drafted a long report and a complaint, sent them to the Sudanese embassy in Berlin, and demanded that the Sudanese police authority in Khartoum should deal with the criminal case of the abusive ex-husband who was also the murderer of the innocent baby of her abused patient. The psychiatrist understood that Ibtihal's entire life is full of abuses and injustices caused by the harsh reality of being born as a Muslim woman. The German psychiatrist made a startling comment when she wrote that it was unfair to be subjected to such abusive life since childhood. She has gone on record when she put it blatantly, it is a crime against any woman to be born in a Muslim society. When Dr. Ibtihal narrated to her German psychiatrist her first rape experience, the Western lady doctor found it difficult to believe that a girl would agree to allow a blackmailer to rape her because she wanted to protect her father's honor. The European psychiatrist concluded that such a story is beyond any conceivable rational and moral behavior for any human being to do in the entire world, no matter what religion she believes in or culture she follows. The German psychiatrist had also become surprised that her Sudanese patient's bitter experiences with her abusive father, her monstrous first rapist, and her evil ex-husband did not affect her mental power by damaging her brain to the extent of rendering her insane for life. The European psychiatrist found that she has to deal with the religious conversion experience of her patient. Then Dr. Ibtihal narrated her painful experience and the mental trauma and physical torture she went through because of her conversion from Islam to Christianity. The German psychiatrist suspected that the physical and mental torture that her patient was subjected to due to her religious conversion might have caused a mental disturbance and psychological damage that might last forever. The Western psychiatrist also tried to help her patient to overcome the painful agony and deep grief and hurt that had been inflicted in her heart because of the Islamic terrorists who beheaded her Christian lover Dr. Samir Peter Deng, and videotaped their brutal and barbaric slaughter, and then uploaded it on YouTube. In that too, the psychiatrist failed to cure her Sudanese patient. But she understood that the only way her patient could overcome that huge loss of the dearest person in her life is her unwavering resolution to expose, defeat, and uproot the foundation of the Islamic terror. If her patient could succeed in achieving that which seemed impossible to attain a goal, then and only then could she be relieved from that agonizing torture, and her deep hurt be healed. Eventually, the German psychiatrist concluded that the psychological damage that had been caused to the terribly abused Sudanese woman Ibtihal due to her love affair with the so-called infidel Christian man Samir, and her conversion from Islam to Christianity, is beyond remedy. Then the Western psychiatrist drafted a detailed report, which included the painful detail her patient had been subjected to, and sent copies of it to the Human Rights, the United Nations Organization, and the Women's Rights Center in Germany. In her report, she called for the abolishment of the law of apostasy. She stated in her report that as Muslim countries were forced in the past to abolish their slavery system, although slavery is still permissible today in the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, they should be forced by the United Nations Organization and the international community to abolish the law of apostasy too. Muslim men are allowed by the Sharia law until today to possess slaves and sleep with them without marriage. However, due to the international interferences and restrictions in Muslim countries, very few men still do that in secret. But the Mujahideen fighters of the Islamic Caliphate in Syria are doing it openly in our day with the Yazidi captured women, and they supplied pieces of evidence from the Quran and hadiths to justify their evil deeds. The psychiatrist has also demanded that all Muslim nations should be forced by the United Nations Organization and the international community to abolish the law of wife's obedience, which allows the police to take the rebellious wife by force to the house of obedience where her husband is permitted to beat and rape her, which is an obvious violation of human rights and also encourages gender discrimination and abusive to the woman. The report of the German psychiatrist about her ex-Muslim patient has been taken seriously by many international organizations. They all promise to force Muslim countries to remove the law of apostasy from the list of capital punishment in their laws. Moreover, they are pledged to compel Muslim countries to prescribe severe punishment to anyone who would persecute or kill a Muslim apostate. They have also called for the abolishment of the obedience sentence, which justifies the wife's enslavement, beating, imprisonment, and rape by the husband. The psychiatrist found that the bitter physical and sexual experiences that Ibtihal went through in Ankara prison are nothing if compared to the brutal tortures and abuses that she had been subjected to in Sudan due to her irrational notion of honor of her Muslim father and Arab family, secret affair with a Christian man, blackmailed rape, forced marriage, trial of apostasy, and the death penalty of the apostate. The German doctor did not only blame the Muslim society in Sudan that led such an innocent, intelligent woman to go through such inhumane treatment, but she put the blame on the religion of Islam itself. She concluded that Islam is the evilest tool of torture that Arab males had ever invented to abuse their female counterparts, and today many Islamic African, Asian, European, and other Muslim countries use it to abuse and torture women. In addition, Muslims must be forced to abolish polygamy, child marriage, wife beating, and circumcision of girls or female genital mutilation, even though those misogynistic practices are justified by the teachings of the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Consequently, the German psychiatrist has authored a big report and published it in one of the widely read newspapers in Germany. She concluded her article by saying that Islam should undergo serious criticisms, and the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad must be all purged of their misogynistic teachings. She suggested further that Muslims should be made to understand that the religion they are following is against human rights, and hence they must be encouraged to forsake such a terror-inspiring and misogynistic satanic Arab cult. The psychiatrist has prepared a report and complaint and submitted copies of them to the Human Rights and the United Nations organizations. She also sent a copy of them to the Sudanese embassy in Germany. In her complaint, she required the government of Sudan to issue a public apology to the Sudanese young woman Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin for being abused and tortured in Khartoum women's prison. She also demanded that the Sudanese government should pay compensation of $1 million for the psychological and physical damages that were caused to her patient during her trial of apostasy in Khartoum. In the meantime, the government of Turkey fulfilled its promise and paid $50 million to Dr. Ibtihal as compensation for the sexual and physical abuses she was subjected to in the Ankara prison. The Sudanese embassy in Berlin rejected the request of the German psychiatrist. Instead, Mr. Ambassador demanded that the government of Germany should extradite the condemned Sudanese girl, who was a prison escapee criminal, Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin, to her country of origin to face the punishment that had been passed against her because of her involvement in the murder of her Muslim father and her conspiring in the hanging of the judge of the Sharia court of Khartoum. The report of the German psychiatrist on Islam is considered by Muslim leaders in the West, imams in mosques, and scholars of Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University as another unjustifiable attack on Islam, and led to many protests in Muslim countries. Even in the Western countries, Muslims organized demonstrations and demanded that the German psychiatrist and the blasphemous Muslim apostate Sudanese woman Ibtihal must issue a public apology for speaking unjustifiable defaming words against Islam. As concerning the law of apostasy, Muslim countries said they cannot abolish a law that is supported by an authentic hadith which was uttered by the infallible prophet of Allah Muhammad, who has been sent by God as mercy to mankind. The so-called master of creation said in one of his authentic hadiths, "Whoever forsakes his religion, kill him." Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 9, Hadith number 57.